Welcome to Issues and Answers with Diane Kinderwater. Issues and Answers is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. And now, Issues and Answers with your host, Diane Kinderwater.
Welcome to the program. I'm Diane Kinderwater, and I've got some great news for you. Good news, kind of surprising news. We're introducing you to a lot of the candidates running for statewide office. We talked about the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, land commission, but we're going to talk to a candidate today who's running in a position that manages over $20 billion, our dollars, $20 billion. So if you thought maybe the governor race and the lieutenant governor race were up there, well, I'll tell you, the state treasurer race is pretty darn important to us if they got their hands on, I shouldn't say their hands on, if they're managing 20 billion tax dollars for us. So I'm so pleased to have this. We've invited all the candidates. Those who have accepted are going to be introduced to you. Today I have James Ellison. He is running for state treasurer. He'll be on the Republican primary ballot coming June 2nd. And also, he's running unopposed. He'll be on the November 3rd general election ballot. So he's in our studio today talking about that $20 billion that he would like to manage, like to get his hands on, but he's going to explain really why this treasurer's office is so important to us. Again, it's not governor, not lieutenant governor, not secretary of state, but $20 billion says a lot. So stay with us as we talk to James Ellison right after this. James Ellison is running for treasurer, state of New Mexico. He is a write-in candidate, officially a write-in candidate. So if you're interested in him as being the Republican nominee for this position, you got to write his name, James Ellison, on that ballot. Do I have it right, James Ellison?
Yes, you're exactly right. I do want to say that I'm the only qualified write-in candidate as on the Republican primary for this position, and that folks need to both fill in the bubble on the ballot and write my name in. If they do one or the other, it doesn't count. They have to fill in the bubble and write James Ellison as treasurer when they vote in the Republican primary. And this time, both independents and Republicans can vote in the Republican
So in the
primary.
ballot under treasurer, it won't have your name, but it'll have what, write-in candidate? What does it say? I've seen it before.
It'll have declared write-in candidate and under a line and then a bubble. So the voters will need to fill in the bubble and then write my name in on that line.
And that name is?
James Ellison.
James Ellison. And again, you have no opposition, but still, there needs to be votes and count.
That's right. I have to have at least 2,351 write-in votes, properly done write-in votes to be the Republican nominee. And if I'm not the nominee, then there is no opposition to the incumbent, and
in the general
election, and that would not be a good thing. So, for better or worse, there are 3 total Republican candidates in the same situation that I am. The candidate for U.S. Senate, Larry Marker, and then the candidate for state auditor, Joshua Lawrence. They're both write-in candidates, and they're both unopposed, as I am. So all 3 of us are in the same position.
Thank you for that education on those positions as well. And again, to make those votes count, if you're a Republican or an independent wanting to vote on the Republican ballot, you need to fill it in correctly, the bubble and the person's name. And those names again for
U.S. Senate, Larry Marker, and for state auditor, Joshua Lawrence, and then state treasurer, me, James Ellison.
Now, so in the past, I said to someone, I'm going to write your name on for governor, whatever race, but it didn't count because they weren't an official. So you can't just write anybody's name on a ballot. It's got to be an official write-in candidate. What makes you, James Ellison, an official write-in candidate for the position of treasurer, state treasurer?
Well, that's a great question. The way it works in New Mexico is that in order to be a qualified write-in candidate, you have to submit your declaration of intent, and you have to collect the required number of signatures. And so I had to collect at least 2,351 signatures from registered Republicans and then submit that to the Secretary of State on the right day. And I did that, and I was deemed a qualified.
Qualified.
Right.
Why? Okay. But a person could be a qualified candidate if they chose that race previously, earlier in the year, and then got enough signature. I mean, you can get it by qualifying at the primary convention. People do it that way, or they can go out and get enough signatures to avoid being nominated at the pre-convention.
Right.
So how many signatures, is it a different number in signatures if you had your name on it as a qualified candidate versus a qualified write-in candidate?
So it's a matter of timing. If I had submitted my declaration of candidacy for state treasurer back in February
with the same number of signatures?
With the same number of
you'd be on
signatures, I would have been on the ballot, and I would have been unopposed.
Yes.
However, I did not apply for state treasurer at that time.
But it is still the same threshold of 2,300 and some. Wow, it's tough. Okay.
It is. It's 2% of the number of
people who voted
people in your party who voted in the last primary.
Okay, but you got it. Thank you.
So the Republicans and Democrats have a different threshold because of the number of people that voted in the last primary.
But again, if you have the 2,300 plus in the primary, you get to be on the general election.
So
not as a write-in candidate.
Right. So right. If I had submitted my declaration of candidacy back in February, I would have been on the ballot for the primary, and then I would be unopposed, and I would go to.
Okay,
November.
But to be on in November, you need at least 2,300 people to do the bubble and your name.
Yes.
Okay.
Now I've got to get that number of votes in order to become the Republican nominee.
And sometimes you probably know this, James. People don't vote down the ballot.
Yes.
But when I told them you're going to manage at $20 billion, they should pay attention to this, right?
Right.
What office is it? Governor, lieutenant governor? How far down is the treasurer?
Well, I'm actually not sure.
It's down there, I think, after auditor. The treasurer's in there, but it's an important.
In terms of an official sort of ranking, I'm not sure, but certainly it is one of the most consequential financial roles in state government.
And now we're going to talk about that. We talked enough about education, civics 101, teaching people, but it's interesting to write in, again, because people think they can just write in any names, but it won't count.
It won't count unless that
James
person,
Ellison will count if you put James Ellison and the little bubble. That counts.
That will count.
Because
that
he's
will
qualified
be a vote
write-in. A little bit about your background. You're an engineer. You worked at Sandia Labs. You were 2 terms as a PRC commissioner. You've worked in engineering. You have degrees from MIT. I thought I'd just mention that. You've got a lot of degrees. Tell us about your education there, James.
Well, so I did go to MIT and did a master's in a program called Technology and Policy and in Mechanical Engineering. And then much later, I took a break from Sandia and I did a 1-year master's in management program from Stanford. I think that's relevant to the state treasurer role because it has, a lot of similarities to a business degree, to an MBA. It's not an MBA, but it's similar. But perhaps even more relevant to this role as state treasurer, I have the designation of certified financial analyst, the CFA designation, which is really the gold standard of qualifications for investment professionals. So it's something that is not easy to attain. Only about 1 in 5 people who start the program finish. It's series of 3 exams. It takes most people 4 years plus to do it. So it's quite rigorous, and it's highly valued in the investment profession. And I feel that I have the strongest credentials to be state treasurer of anyone in this race.
I saw on your website you wrote real financial credentials, not political connections.
That's right. I don't feel that this, if you look at the state offices, I think state treasurer has to be probably the least political of all the state offices. It really demands competence and qualifications, good ethics. So it is not, it shouldn't be a political role. And I'm not a politician. I'm an outsider. I've never run for political office. I feel that most important for this role is your qualifications, your commitment to ethics, and what you intend to do with the job.
What do you intend to do with the job, James Ellison?
So that's a great question. Let me start out with one thing that the state treasurer doesn't do that I believe that they should do, and that is unclaimed property. So that is, if you have, a relative, a parent who passed away and who was getting, say, oil and gas,
dividend check,
dividends or
royalty
something,
check,
and they don't know who to send it to. So that goes to the Unclaimed Assets Program. Right now, that's with the Tax and Revenue Department.
Okay.
They're holding $390 million of assets that belong to New Mexicans. And last year, they dispersed less than 5 cents out of every dollar. So just on the face of it, they're not doing a very good job at getting these assets to New Mexicans. And when you think about it, the Tax and Revenue Department, they're really designed to take in revenue. Their job isn't to
give it out. They don't want to give it out, James Ellison. I know they don't want to. So regarding this, let's use that example again. A woman dies, elderly woman dies, has been receiving royalty checks, but they don't know who her family is, they don't know who her dependents are, and so the checks just accumulate, and the state takes them over and gives them to Tax and Rev.
So right, it would let's say the oil company or the other mineral rights holder, they don't know the asset. Say the mineral rights haven't been legally transferred to
anybody else,
to the lady's kids or
right,
whoever, and so there's literally nowhere that they can send them to. So they send them to the state of New Mexico.
Now, does that state have a responsibility to look for?
Well, this is the question, right? So how, do you really go looking for those people, or do you kind of just say, well, if you think you have something, you ought to come see us. So
what would you do differently having it with the state treasurer's office?
So first of all, we would much more aggressively advertise and seek out people. We would be sending letters, and we would be actively trying to contact people instead of just waiting for people to show up.
How did you discover this situation?
Well, this is something that I, in doing my research about the state treasury, I was frankly surprised that it was not already housed with the treasury, because nationally, 30 out of the 50 states have this function in the state treasury. So, we are an outlier in having it with tax and revenue. And, the other reason I think it should be with the state treasury is that, the state treasury is a fiduciary, and, their job is to be good stewards of other people's money. And so the state treasurer is the natural place that you want to have investing this money while, you're finding the people who it belongs to. That's not something that the tax and revenue has particular
Is it just sitting there at tax and revenue, or
expertise.
it's not being invested? But you're saying you'd like to see it invested?
It should, honestly, I don't know how or if they're investing it at tax and revenue, but I do know that the state treasurer, that is their function, is to be a fiduciary
on behalf of other people.
on behalf of other people, and do a good job at investing the money.
Give me an example of what else the treasurer, you'd like to see the treasurer do that, but what does the treasurer, give me an example of what the treasurer, because you're the one who told me it's got $20 billion.
Yeah, right. So the $20 billion fund is a short-term fund. So basically, all the money that comes to the government and all the money that the state government spends goes through the treasury. So, the treasury is the banker for the state.
But not my state income tax.
Well, eventually the income tax will make its way through the treasury when it's collected, right? After it's collected, it will go through there. And because the treasury actually has to make payment on obligations from that the state government has, they invest this money in a very safe way, in very liquid investments, and so they want to get a good return on them. But the number one priority is safety, number two is liquidity, and then number three is return. So.
Safety is number one, and then liquidity. You need liquid to be able to pay the bills.
Right. So this is, if you think about a money market fund, the Treasury runs kind of a glorified money market fund for the state, for, the obligations of the state government. Beyond that, the treasurer sits on 13 different boards and councils, one of them being the State Investment Council. And so that's the one that manages the permanent fund, which is up to about $65 billion right now. So the treasurer has a vote and a voice on the board that manages the permanent fund.
It makes your $20 billion look like peanuts.
well, and there you can and do get into some real long-term investing, and so you've got a lot more leeway into what you invest in. But I did want to say another thing that I think is important that I would want to change. I don't believe that there is the level of transparency that there should be with how the state treasurer is investing that $20 billion. And the reason I say that is, you go to the website and you try to figure out what's invested, what have the returns been, how does that compare to some benchmark. It's very hard, and the lay person, you really need to be financially sophisticated, and you need to poke around and find the right sort of PDF file to look at to start to piece it together. I don't think we should make our residents work that hard to try to figure out how good a job the treasurer is doing. Also,
and especially if they're doing a good job, they would be proud to say, yes, we've earned this much interest. This fund is liquid. This fund is earning 3%, 4%. We're proud of it, but it should be hard to find out.
It's hard to find good numbers. Also, the latest annual report that you can find is the 2024 fiscal year report. And so it's kind of perplexing because 2025, the fiscal year ended at the end of June. And so here we are almost 10 months later, and there's not a report on the website that people can look at to see, what the performance was in fiscal year 2025. I think that's strange, and it doesn't signify the level of, commitment to transparency that I think people would like to see. And so what I would do is I would commit to having an investment report, a report on investments written in plain English for the public by Halloween of each year. And so that's within 4 months of the close.
July, August, September, October, yes.
Of the
4
close
months,
of the
yes.
fiscal year. So I would commit to getting that out because I think that's needed for transparency.
With computers that do all the work, it sounds you just put in the number, right? You put in the numbers and should be able to pop out this.
It can be more complicated, but I think for getting a report out to the public to let people know what are the results been, that is very doable. And
the reports you have seen, James Ellison is running as a write-in candidate for state treasurer on the Republican ballot, where independents can write it in as well. What kind of returns have you seen previous to 2025, since we can't get that report? 24, you did some research. What have you found out?
Well, I mean,
or is it too hard to figure it out? Is it too hard?
What I want to say as well is what else I would commit to doing. I would commit to pursuing what's called global investment performance standards. And, these are a set of standards that, it's not a one-time thing. It's something that you adopt as an organization. And what that essentially means is that your calculations of your returns are consistent, that the benchmarks that you're choosing are appropriate, and that the way you're presenting the report is not misleading. And so the Pennsylvania State Treasurer committed to this and did this last year. To my knowledge, they're the first state in the nation to do that. I would like New Mexico to be the second state in the nation to step up to these standards of presenting investment performance.
Very interesting, because they say you could always, the numbers can be manipulated to say whatever kind of story you want to say.
And they can. And I was, I was concerned in looking at the 2024 annual report. The treasurer made the statement that, the rate of return that year was the return rate, she said, was the greatest it's ever been. It doesn't make sense to me, because the rate in those short-term funds is going to be very similar to short-term bonds. And so when, there have been times in our history when the short-term bond rate has been much higher. Like, think back to end of 70s, early 80s, the short-term bonds were, 10, 12, great. So I can't believe that the rate was the greatest in history. And if what she meant was the absolute amount of earnings were the greatest in history, then I could believe that, but only because, our state budget has grown so dramatically.
Right.
It was about $6 billion in fiscal year 2019. Last fiscal year, it was $10.5 billion. And so just the amount of money that the Treasury is managing is much greater. But that's not a rate, and so I just don't know if the treasurer, doesn't know the difference between a rate of return and an absolute amount, or, I'm just not sure how to interpret it. And I think going to these stricter standards would accurately portray and reflect the investment performance. It's what we should be doing.
And every state, the more states that join this global parameter, the more we understand each other and how we're rated against.
I think the more honest you're being with the public in terms of how you're doing managing these short-term funds.
Because we don't know, except the highest. Something was the highest ever, but we're not sure what. James Ellison, what else would you like to point out? We just have a couple minutes left, and thank you for explaining so well all these things.
Oh, it's been
and the importance of this office. It can't be taken for granted. It can't be taken. I mean, maybe people aren't questioning or asking. You investigating. You saw this as a rate versus absolute earnings. Maybe they're not. Maybe we're not paying attention to that office.
Well, I mean, usually if you hear about the Treasury in the newspaper, it's a bad day.
Which we've had in the past. We've had that in our history.
No, we have.
Brought to tears. I was brought to tears seeing bags of money being transferred.
No, it's you know, there's a pretty dark history with the state treasury office, which it's taken time to work through that, and you know, it's an office that is overlooked, but it takes, you know, an absolute commitment to ethics and professionalism, because we just can't go back to that.
No, we can't. James Ellison, where can they get more information on you?
I'd ask people to please go to my website. It's ellisonfornm.com. That's ELLISONFORNM.com, and it'll talk more about me and what I'm proposing to do at the State Treasury.
Appreciate you running. Appreciate your concern and efforts and educating our audience about the importance of the State Treasury.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
James Ellison, he's a write-in candidate for the primary election coming up on June 2nd. Republican ballot. Republicans and independents can choose that ballot and vote on it if they like. Not Democrats, because they have to vote on their own Democratic ballot this time. But independents can choose Republican Republican. Independents can choose Democrats or Republicans to vote. But again, if you want to write in James Ellison's name, you got to put the little bubble as well for state treasurer. Thanks for watching the show. I'm Diane. Make it a great week. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Issues and Answers with your host, Diane Kinderwater, is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. To comment on today's program, email us at info@kchftv.org or call us at 505-345-1991. Join us again for Issues and Answers with Diane Kinderwater.